The alarm clock buzzed at 6:30 p.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 12 years. Marieke van der Berg rolled out of bed, her feet finding the cold wooden floor of her small Amsterdam apartment. Outside her window, the February sky was already dark and she could hear the distant sound of trams rolling through the city streets. She moved through her evening routine like clockwork. A quick shower, a simple dinner of bread and cheese, and a strong cup of coffee to wake herself up properly. Most people were winding down from their day, but for Marieke, the day was just beginning. She had been working night shifts at Amsterdam Medical Center since she was 22, fresh out of nursing school with big dreams and an even bigger heart. At 34, she still loved her job, even when it drained every ounce of energy from her body. The night shift was different from day shifts, quieter, more intense, and somehow more personal. During the day, the hospital buzzed with activity. Doctors making rounds, families visiting, administrators rushing around with clipboards. But at night, it was just the patients, the essential staff, and the weight of keeping people alive until morning. Marieke grabbed her worn leather bag and checked that everything was inside. Stethoscope, pens, a small notebook where she jotted down reminders, and a thermos of coffee that would need to last her until dawn. She also packed a small container of homemade cookies that her mother had sent from the village where she grew up. She would never admit it to anyone, but sometimes she shared these cookies with patients who couldn't sleep, especially the elderly ones who reminded her of her own grandparents. The 20-minute bike ride to the hospital was part of her routine she actually enjoyed. Even in winter, even in the rain, there was something peaceful about cycling through Amsterdam's quiet streets before the night really began. The city looked different at this hour. The tourists were back in their hotels, the office workers were home with their families, and the canals reflected the warm glow of street lamps. Amsterdam Medical Center was a massive building that never slept. As Marieke locked her bike in the staff area, she could see lights and windows all the way up to the 10th floor. Somewhere up there, people were fighting for their lives, having surgery, giving birth, or simply trying to make it through another night of pain or worry. She badged into the building and took the elevator to the 7th floor, where she had worked for the past 8 years. The medical ward was her domain, where patients came with everything from heart problems to mysterious infections that stumped the doctors. She knew every room, every corner, every quirk of the building on this floor. "Good evening." "Marieke," called out Dr. Helena Kramer, the night supervisor who had become both a mentor and sometimes a source of frustration for Marieke over the years. Dr. Kramer was a good doctor, but she believed strongly in maintaining professional distance from patients. "We have a full house tonight. Room 712 came in this afternoon with chest pains, and the woman in 718 is asking for you specifically. She said you were the only one who understood how to help her with her breathing exercises." This was typical. Patients often requested Marieke because she had a gift for making people feel heard and cared for. While other nurses efficiently completed their tasks and moved on, Marieke lingered. She asked about grandchildren, remembered favorite foods, and somehow always knew exactly what to say when someone was scared or in pain. "I also need to remind you again about our policies regarding patient contact," Dr. Kramer continued, her voice taking on that familiar tone of warning. "I know you care deeply, but remember that our job is to provide medical care during their stay here. We cannot be involved in their lives outside these walls." Marieke nodded, just as she always did when this topic came up. She understood the rules. She really did. Hospitals needed boundaries to function properly. But sometimes, late at night, when a patient shared their deepest fears or when she saw someone who had no one else in the world, those boundaries felt impossibly cruel. The rules made sense on paper. Don't give patients your personal phone number. Don't visit them at home after discharge. Don't get emotionally involved in their personal problems. Don't use hospital resources for non-medical purposes. These weren't just suggestions. They were strict policies that could cost someone their job if violated. But Marieke had always been someone who saw people first and patients second. When she looked at someone in a hospital bed, she didn't just see a medical condition that needed to be treated. She saw someone's father who was worried about who would take care of his garden. She saw someone's grandmother who was afraid she would never see her family again. She saw human beings who needed more than just medicine to heal. Her colleagues respected her work, but sometimes she caught them rolling their eyes when she spent extra time with difficult patients or when she brought in small comfort items from home. They weren't mean about it, but they thought she was too soft, too involved. "You can't save everyone, Mariek," they would say. "This job will burn you out if you don't learn to protect yourself." The thing was, Marieke didn't want to protect herself from caring. Caring was what made the job meaningful. The technical skills of nursing, giving medications, checking vital signs, managing equipment, those were important, but anyone could learn to do those things. What made the difference was treating each person like they mattered, like their story was worth hearing, like their fears and hopes were valid and important. Her own life was simple and quiet. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment that she had decorated with plants and photographs from her childhood village. Half of her salary went to support her elderly parents, who still lived in the same house where she had grown up. Her father had been a baker, her mother a teacher, and they had raised her to believe that helping others was not just a job but a calling. She didn't have much money left over after paying rent and helping her parents, but she didn't need much. Her pleasures were small: a good book, a walk along the canals on her days off, occasional dinners with friends from nursing school who had scattered to different hospitals around the Netherlands. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to have more money, to travel or buy nice things, but mostly she was content with her life. As she began her rounds that evening, checking on each patient and reviewing their charts, Marieke had no idea that everything was about to change. She had no way of knowing that before the week was over, she would make a decision that would cost her everything she had worked for, and that sometimes the people who seem to have nothing are the ones who end up changing your life forever. The hospital was quiet except for the usual sounds of machines beeping and the soft conversations of staff members. It felt like any other night, but it wasn't. Some nights stay with you forever, and this was going to be one of them. It was nearly midnight when the ambulance arrived. Marieke heard the familiar sound of the emergency doors sliding open and the quick footsteps of paramedics rushing down the hallway. She was in room 715, adjusting the IV drip for an elderly man who couldn't sleep, when she heard them talking to Dr. Kramer at the nurses' station. "Found him collapsed near Vondelpark," one of the paramedics was saying. "Looks like he's been on the streets for a while. Blood sugar is dangerously low, and his body temperature was dropping fast when we got to him." Marieke finished with her patient and walked over to see what was happening. On the stretcher was a man who looked to be in his 50s, but it was hard to tell exactly. His face was gaunt, his clothes were dirty and torn, and his hair and beard were unkempt. What struck her most was how thin he was. Not just thin, but the kind of thin that comes from not eating properly for weeks. "He's American," the other paramedic added, handing over some papers. "Had this in his pocket, but no passport, no wallet, nothing else." She held up a crumpled business card from a hotel in downtown Amsterdam, dated 3 weeks ago. Dr. Kramer looked at the man with the professional detachment that Marieke knew well. "Room 719 is ready. Let's get him stabilized first, then we can figure out the rest." She turned to Marieke. "Can you handle the intake?" "I need to check on the surgical patient in 703. As they moved the man to his room, Marieke got her first close look at him. His breathing was shallow, and when she checked his pulse, his skin felt cold and clammy. But what really caught her attention were his hands. Despite being obviously homeless and malnourished, his hands were clean, with neatly trimmed nails. These weren't the hands of someone who had been on the streets for years. Something had happened to this man recently, something that had changed his life completely. Over the next few hours, as they worked to stabilize him, bits of his story began to emerge. His name was James Mitchell, and he was 52 years old. He had indeed been staying at the hotel on the business card, but that was nearly a month ago. The blood test confirmed what they suspected: severe diabetes that had been completely untreated, along with malnutrition and dehydration. When James finally woke up around 4 in the morning, Marieke was checking his blood sugar levels. His eyes opened slowly, and she could see confusion and fear in them. This was always a difficult moment, when someone wakes up in a strange place hooked up to machines with no memory of how they got there. "Hello," she said softly, sitting down in the chair beside his bed. "You're in Amsterdam Medical Center. You're safe now. My name is Marieke and I'm your nurse." James tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. She gave him some water with a straw and he managed to say, "How long have I been here?" "You were brought in about 4 hours ago. You collapsed in Vondelpark. Do you remember what happened?" He closed his eyes and was quiet for so long that she thought he might have fallen back asleep. Then he said, "I remember being so tired and cold. I think I was trying to find somewhere warm to sleep." This was the part of her job that Dr. Kramer always warned her about, the questions that went beyond medical care. But Marieke couldn't help herself. "Are you visiting Amsterdam?" The paramedic said, "You're American." James opened his eyes and looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding whether to trust her or not. Finally, he said, "I was visiting. But that was a long time ago now. I lost my passport and my money and—" His voice trailed off. "What happened to your passport?" Marieke asked gently. "I was robbed. About 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 now. I don't really remember the days very well anymore. They took everything, my wallet, my passport, my phone. I tried to go to the police, but without ID and with my Dutch being so bad, it was complicated. I was supposed to go to the consulate, but I kept putting it off, and then I ran out of money for the hotel." As the night went on, and James became more alert, more of his story came out. He had been a soldier for 20 years, serving in different places around the world. After he left the military, he had worked as a mechanic in Oregon. He had been married, with 2 children, a boy and a girl. He said when Marieke asked about his family, past tense. "There was an accident 2 years ago. A drunk driver. I was at work when it happened." His voice became so quiet she had to lean in to hear him. "I came to Amsterdam because I wanted to disappear. I thought maybe if I got far enough away from everything that reminded me of them, the pain would stop." Marieke felt her heart break a little. She had heard many sad stories over the years, but there was something about James that got to her. Maybe it was the way he spoke about his family, or maybe it was seeing how lost and alone he was. Here was a man who had served his country, who had worked hard and built a life, and who had lost everything that mattered to him. "The thing is," James continued, "disappearing is harder than you think. Even when you have nothing left, you still wake up every day, and the pain follows you wherever you go." By morning, his condition had improved significantly. The IV fluids and insulin had brought his blood sugar to normal levels, and some color had returned to his face. But Marieke knew that once he was medically stable, the hospital would discharge him. And then what? He had no money, no identification, and nowhere to go. During her break, she found herself thinking about James more than she should have. She knew the rules about getting involved with patients' personal problems. But how could she just ignore the fact that this man was going to be back on the streets in a day or two? When she returned to his room to check his vital signs, she found him staring out the window at the gray Amsterdam morning. "Feeling better?" she asked. "Much better, thanks to you," he said. "I know I'll probably be discharged soon. The doctor was here earlier and said my levels are looking good." Marieke hesitated, then sat down in the chair beside his bed again. This was against protocol. She should be making her rounds, not sitting and talking with patients. But something inside her couldn't walk away. "James, what will you do when you leave here? Do you have anywhere to go?" He shook his head. "I've been sleeping in doorways under bridges when it rains. There are shelters, but they're usually full and you can only stay for a few nights at a time. Have you contacted the American consulate about replacing your passport? I tried once, but I need to fill out forms and provide information that I don't have with me. And honestly," he paused, looking embarrassed, "I'm not sure I want to go back to Oregon. There's nothing there for me anymore except memories." That afternoon, when her shift ended, Marieke did something she had never done before. Instead of going home, she stopped by the hospital gift shop and bought a phone card. Then she went back to James's room. "I brought you something," she said, holding up the card. "You can use the phone at the nurse's station to call the consulate. I looked up their number for you." James stared at the card, then at her. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Marieke didn't have a good answer for that question. She just knew that she couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. Because everyone deserves to have someone care about what happens to them. It was a simple act of kindness, but it was also the first step down a path that would change both of their lives forever. The phone call to the American consulate didn't go the way James had hoped. Marieke stood nearby as he explained his situation to the person on the other end of the line. She watched his face fall as they explained the process for replacing a lost passport. Forms that needed to be filled out, fees that needed to be paid, and a waiting period that could take weeks. "They want me to come to the consulate in person with proof of identity," James told her after he hung up. "But I don't have proof of identity." That's the whole problem. And they want fees that I don't have money to pay. Dr. Kramer appeared at the nurse's station just as James was handing the phone back to Marike. She looked at both of them with a questioning expression. Is there a problem here? She asked. No problem, Marike said quickly. I was just helping Mr. Mitchell make a call about his passport situation. Dr. Kramer nodded, but Marike could see the slight frown on her face. Using the hospital phone for patient personal calls was a gray area, and they both knew it. Over the next 2 days, as James recovered his strength, Marike found herself stopping by his room more often than necessary. She would bring him extra portions from the cafeteria, saying the kitchen had made too much food. She spent her break times researching Dutch social services and American embassy procedures on her phone. She even called a few homeless shelters to ask about availability, though most had waiting lists. You don't have to do all this, James told her on his 3rd day. I've been taking care of myself for 2 years now. I'll figure something out. But Marike could see that he was scared. Despite his tough words, she noticed how he barely slept, how he jumped whenever someone came to the door, and how he stared out the window with the look of someone who had nowhere to go. On Thursday morning, Dr. Kramer pulled her aside during rounds. Marike, I need to speak with you about Mr. Mitchell in room 719. Marike felt her stomach drop. Is there a problem with his care? His medical care is fine. He's stable enough to be discharged today, but I've noticed you spending a lot of time with him, and other nurses have mentioned that you've been making phone calls on his behalf. I want to remind you of our policies about patient relationships. I understand the policies, Marike said carefully. I was just trying to help him understand his options. That's not our job, Dr. Kramer said firmly. Our job is to treat his medical condition and discharge him when he's stable. What happens after that is not our responsibility. I know it's hard, especially with cases like this, but we have to maintain professional boundaries. That afternoon, Marike watched as the discharge paperwork was prepared. James would be released the next morning. She knew exactly what that meant. He would be back on the streets, trying to survive without proper medication for his diabetes, without regular meals, without a safe place to sleep. That evening, after her shift ended, Marike made a decision that she knew was against every rule in the hospital handbook. She went to an ATM and withdrew 300 euros from her savings account. Then she found a small budget hotel near the hospital and paid for a week's stay. When she came back to give James the hotel keycard, she felt nervous in a way she had never felt before at work. What's this? James asked, looking at the card. It's a room at the Hotel Amsterdam just 2 blocks from here. Paid for a week. It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm. James stared at her. I can't accept this. This is too much. Yes, you can, Marike said. And you will. Because right now you need help and I can help you. But why? Why would you spend your own money on someone you barely know? Marike had been asking herself the same question. The logical answer was that she couldn't afford to do this. 300 euros was a significant amount of money for her, almost half her monthly rent. Her parents depended on her financial support and her own savings were small, but when she looked at James, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone who had served his country, who had lost everything that mattered to him, and who was now alone in a foreign country with no way to help himself. She saw someone who reminded her of her own father in some ways, proud but vulnerable, and trying to maintain dignity in an impossible situation. Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply. Over the next week, Marike's involvement in James's life deepened in ways that she knew were completely inappropriate. She visited him at the hotel during her breaks, bringing him insulin and checking his blood sugar levels. She helped him fill out passport replacement forms and accompanied him to the consulate, translating when his limited Dutch wasn't enough. She used her work computer to research social service and contacted organizations that helped homeless people. She even brought him to her own doctor when he needed prescriptions refilled, paying for the visit and medications herself. You're going to get in trouble, James warned her more than once. This is too much. I don't want you to lose your job because of me. I won't lose my job, Marike assured him. Though she was beginning to worry about that herself, she had already spent over 800 euros on hotel stays, medications, and other expenses. Her savings account was nearly empty, and she had told her parents she couldn't send them money that month due to unexpected expenses. The end came on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after James had first been admitted to the hospital. Marika was at her work computer, researching housing programs for asylum seekers and refugees, thinking that maybe some of those programs could help James. She was so focused on her search that she didn't hear Dr. Kramer approach from behind. "What are you doing, Marika?" Marika's heart stopped. On her screen was a website for Dutch immigration services, and next to her computer was a notebook where she had written down phone numbers and addresses of various social service agencies. "I was just researching something," she said weakly. Dr. Kramer looked at the screen, then at the notebook, then back at Marika. "This is about James Mitchell, isn't it? The American patient from 2 weeks ago?" There was no point in lying. "Yes. Come to my office now." In Dr. Kramer's office, the truth came out. Marika admitted to using hospital resources to research James's situation. She admitted to visiting him after discharge. She even admitted to paying for his hotel and providing medical care outside the hospital. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" Dr. Kramer asked. "You've violated patient confidentiality by accessing his records after discharge. You've used hospital equipment for personal purposes. You've practiced medicine without authorization outside this facility, and you've maintained an inappropriate relationship with a former patient." "I was trying to help someone who had nowhere else to turn," Marika said. "That's not your job." Dr. Kramer's voice rose. "Your job is to provide nursing care to patients while they're in this hospital. Period. We have rules for very good reasons, and you've broken virtually all of them." The disciplinary meeting was held the next day. Marika sat across from Dr. Kramer and 2 hospital administrators as they laid out the charges against her. They had documentation of her computer usage, witness statements from other nurses who had seen her spending excessive time with James, and evidence of her unauthorized medical activities. "We have no choice but to terminate your employment," the chief administrator said. "This level of policy violation cannot be overlooked." When Marika cleaned out her locker that afternoon, her hands were shaking. 12 years of her career, gone. Her colleagues looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. Some thought she had lost her mind. Others quietly admired her for caring so much, but no one could understand why she had risked everything for a stranger. The worst part came over the following weeks, as word of her dismissal spread through Amsterdam's medical community. Hospital administrators talked to each other, and Marika's name became associated with unprofessional conduct and boundary violations. Applications she submitted to other hospitals were rejected, often without explanation. Her parents called, worried and confused when they learned she had lost her job. How could she explain that she had thrown away her career to help a homeless American veteran? How could she make them understand that sometimes caring for someone requires breaking the rules? 3 months after losing her job, Marika was working as a house cleaner, earning minimum wage and struggling to pay her rent. She wondered if she had been foolish to sacrifice everything for James. But when she thought about him, alive, getting stronger, working toward getting his life back together, she knew she would make the same choice again. She just hoped it would somehow be worth it in the end. 6 months had passed since Marika lost her job at Amsterdam Medical Center. 6 months of cleaning offices at night, scrubbing floors in restaurants, and taking whatever work she could find to pay her rent. Her small apartment, which had once felt cozy and comfortable, now felt like a prison. The plants she used to love caring for had started to wilt because she couldn't afford to replace them when they died. Her savings account was completely empty. The money she used to send to her parents each month had stopped, and she could hear the worry in their voices every time they called. They tried to hide it, but she knew they were struggling without her help. Her father's arthritis was getting worse, making it harder for him to work in the bakery. And her mother's small teacher's pension wasn't enough to cover their medical expenses. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle, though. It was the loneliness. For 12 years, her identity had been tied to being a nurse. She was someone who helped people, someone who made a difference. Now she felt like she had disappeared completely. The friends from nursing school had gradually stopped calling. They didn't know what to say to someone who had thrown away everything they had worked for. Some mornings, Marika woke up wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Had helping James really been worth losing everything? She tried to push those thoughts away, but they crept in during the quiet moments when she was scrubbing someone else's bathroom or walking home alone through the dark streets. She hadn't heard from James in over 2 months. The last time they had spoken, he had finally received his replacement passport and was staying at a different shelter while he figured out what to do next. He had thanked her repeatedly for everything she had done, but she could see the guilt in his eyes. He blamed himself for her job loss, no matter how many times she told him it wasn't his fault. "I should go back to America," he had said during their last conversation. "There's nothing keeping me here, and maybe you can rebuild your life if I'm not around to remind people of what happened." Marieke had argued against it, but part of her wondered if he was right. Maybe if James left Amsterdam, the story would fade from people's memories, and eventually some hospital would be willing to hire her again. On a rainy Thursday evening in late October, Marieke was coming home from her job cleaning offices downtown. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from cleaning chemicals, and she was dreading opening the bills that she knew were waiting in her mailbox. As she climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, she felt older than her 34 years. She was fumbling with her keys when she heard footsteps behind her on the stairs. Amsterdam wasn't the safest city at night, and she lived in a neighborhood that had become rougher since she could no longer afford her old place. She turned around, ready to tell whoever it was that she had no money worth stealing. Instead, she saw James standing there, but he looked completely different. He was wearing clean, well-fitting clothes, not expensive but new and proper. His hair was cut and his beard was neatly trimmed. Most surprisingly, he was carrying a leather briefcase and had an expression on his face that she had never seen before. Not the desperation or defeat she was used to, but something that looked almost like excitement. "James, what are you doing here? How did you find my address?" "I called the hospital," he said. "I told them I was an old friend trying to reach you. I know I probably shouldn't have done that, but I needed to see you." Marieke looked at him more carefully. Something was very different. Even his posture was different, straighter, more confident. "Are you okay? You look different. Can we talk inside?" James asked. "I have something very important to tell you." Marieke hesitated. Her apartment was tiny and shabby, and she was embarrassed for him to see how far she had fallen. But the earnest look in his eyes convinced her to unlock the door. Inside her small living room, James sat down on her worn sofa and opened the briefcase. He pulled out an official-looking envelope with a law firm's letterhead. "Marieke, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible," he began. "Do you remember me telling you about my family? About losing my wife and children?" "Of course," she said quietly. "What I never told you was that I also lost touch with most of my extended family after the accident. I couldn't bear to be around anyone who knew them, anyone who would want to talk about them or offer sympathy. I cut everyone out of my life." Marieke sat down across from him, confused about where this was going. "When I finally got my replacement passport and contacted the consulate, they helped me sort through some legal paperwork that had been piling up, mail that had been forwarded and forwarded until it finally caught up with me here in Amsterdam." James held up the envelope. "This letter is from a law firm in Portland. It's about my uncle, your uncle, my father's brother, Richard. I hadn't spoken to him in probably 15 years. We had some family argument when I was young, something stupid that seemed important at the time. After my family died, I was so consumed with grief that I never even found out what happened to other relatives." James opened the envelope and pulled out several official documents. "Richard died 3 years ago. He never married, never had children, and apparently he had been trying to find me for months before he died." Marieke looked at the papers, but the legal language was confusing. "I don't understand what this has to do with anything." "My Uncle Richard was an engineer," James continued. "Back in the 1980s and 90s, he developed some technology for early GPS systems, components that seemed unimportant at the time, but became essential as GPS technology evolved. He held several patents on these technologies." James's voice was getting stronger, more excited. When GPS became widespread in cars and phones, those patents became incredibly valuable. Richard had been collecting royalties for years, but he lived simply and saved everything. He kept trying to find me because he wanted to leave everything to me in his will. Marieke still didn't understand. "Leave what to you?" James looked directly at her, and she could see tears forming in his eyes. "Marieke, my uncle left me over $40 million. The words didn't make sense at first." Marieke stared at him, waiting for the punchline or the explanation that would make this make sense. $40 million? That was an amount of money she couldn't even really comprehend. That's impossible, she said finally. I thought so too. That's why it took me 2 months to believe it was real. The lawyers had to prove my identity, verify the inheritance, transfer everything to my name. I've been living in a fog, trying to understand how my life could change so completely. James pulled out a bank statement and showed it to her. Even seeing the numbers on the page, Marieke couldn't quite believe it. I kept thinking about you during all of this, James continued, about how you lost everything because you tried to help me, about how you saw me as a human being worth saving when I was at my lowest point, about how you risked your career, your reputation, your financial security for someone you barely knew. Marieke felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. People like her didn't have fairy tale endings, especially not after making such terrible mistakes. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, James said, but I do have a question for you. What would you do if money was no object? If you could help people the way you've always wanted to, without worrying about hospital politics or administrative rules or any of the things that get in the way of actual care? Marieke thought about all the times she had felt frustrated by the limitations of working in a big hospital. All the patients she had wanted to help more than the system allowed. All the people who fell through the cracks because they didn't fit into neat categories. I would want to help people who have nowhere else to go, she said slowly. People like you were. People the system doesn't know how to handle. James smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was a smile without sadness behind it. Then I have a proposition for you, he said, and I hope you'll at least consider it. James leaned forward, his eyes bright with an energy that Marieke had never seen in him before. I want to start a foundation, he said, but not just any foundation. I want to create something that supports healthcare workers who do what you did for me, people who see beyond the rules and protocols to help human beings who are falling through the cracks. Marieke stared at him, still trying to process everything he had told her. A foundation? The Marieke Foundation, James said. I've already spoken with lawyers about it. We would support healthcare professionals who face disciplinary action for going above and beyond to help patients. We would provide legal assistance, financial support, and help them find new opportunities when their own institutions fail them. The idea was overwhelming. Marieke had spent so many nights wondering if she had been foolish to risk everything for one person. Now James was suggesting that her choice could help others in similar situations. But that's not all, James continued. I also want to fund a clinic, a place where you could practice the kind of medicine you've always believed in, without administrators looking over your shoulder or rules that prevent you from actually helping people. Marieke stood up and walked to her small window, looking out at the Amsterdam street below. A few months ago, she had been cleaning these same streets, feeling like her life was over. Now James was offering her a chance to not only rebuild her career, but to do it in a way she had only dreamed about. Why? She asked, not turning around. You don't owe me anything. I chose to help you. That's exactly why, James said. You chose to help a complete stranger when it cost you everything you had worked for. You saw me as a human being worth saving when I couldn't even see that in myself. Do you have any idea what that meant to me? Marieke turned back to face him. She could see tears in his eyes again. When I lost my family, I lost my purpose, James continued. I came to Amsterdam to disappear because I couldn't see any reason to keep living. But you showed me that there are still people in the world who care about strangers, who will sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. You gave me back my faith in humanity. Over the next few weeks, Marieke found herself pulled into a whirlwind of activity that felt like a dream. James had indeed inherited more money than she could have imagined, and he was serious about using it to create something meaningful. They met with lawyers, architects, and healthcare consultants. James insisted that every major decision be made together, even though it was his money funding everything. This was your vision before it was mine, he told her. I just have the means to make it happen. The foundation was established first with a mission to support healthcare workers who prioritized patient welfare over institutional policies. They created a legal fund to help nurses, doctors, and other medical professionals who faced disciplinary action for advocating for their patients. They also established a scholarship program for nursing students who demonstrated exceptional compassion and commitment to patient care. The clinic took longer to plan, but it was the part that excited Marieke most. Located in a converted warehouse in a diverse Amsterdam neighborhood, it would provide healthcare services to people who often fell through the cracks of the regular medical system, homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people with mental health issues, and others who needed more than just medical treatment. We're not trying to replace the hospitals, Marieke explained to the contractors working on the renovation. We're trying to fill the gaps that the big institutions can't or won't fill. The clinic would operate differently from traditional medical facilities. There would be social workers on staff, translation services, help with navigating government bureaucracy, and even basic services like showers and clean clothes. Most importantly, there would be no time limits on appointments and no restrictions on what kind of help staff could provide to patients. As word spread about the project, something unexpected happened. Healthcare workers from around Amsterdam began reaching out, wanting to be involved. Many of them had their own stories of being frustrated by institutional limitations, of wanting to help patients in ways that went beyond their official duties. Dr. Kramer was one of the first to contact Marieke directly. "I heard about what you're doing," she said when she called. "I want you to know that I never wanted to fire you. But I had no choice given hospital policy." "I understand," Marieke replied. "You were doing your job." "The thing is, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about whether our policies sometimes prevent us from providing the best care possible. I've seen too many patients who needed more help than we could officially provide." Dr. Kramer paused. "Would you consider letting me volunteer at your clinic? Maybe one day a week? I think I could learn something from the approach you're taking." The clinic opened 8 months after that rainy evening when James appeared at Marieke's door with the briefcase. The opening day was overwhelming. Dozens of people lined up outside, many of them individuals who had been turned away from other facilities or who had been afraid to seek help anywhere else. Marieke worked her first shift in almost a year, and it felt like coming home. She treated a homeless woman with diabetes, helped an undocumented immigrant navigate the process of getting mental health services, and spent an hour with an elderly man who just needed someone to listen to his health concerns without rushing him. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a young nurse from Amsterdam Medical Center brought in a patient who needed services the hospital couldn't provide. "I heard you help people who don't fit into the regular system," the nurse said. "I have a patient who's been discharged, but she has nowhere to go and needs ongoing care. I know I'm not supposed to be involved after discharge, but I can't just ignore her situation." Marieke smiled. "That's exactly why we're here." As the months passed, the clinic grew into something even more powerful than Marieke had imagined. They helped hundreds of people who had nowhere else to turn. The foundation supported dozens of healthcare workers who faced ethical dilemmas similar to what Marieke had experienced. And perhaps most importantly, they began to influence how other medical institutions thought about patient care. Some hospitals in Amsterdam started revising their policies to allow more flexibility in patient advocacy. Medical schools began incorporating discussions about ethical decision-making and the importance of seeing patients as complete human beings rather than just medical cases. James threw himself into the work with an energy that surprised everyone who met him. The man who had come to Amsterdam to disappear had found a new purpose in helping others find hope. He completed a degree in social work and became one of the clinic's most effective patient advocates. "I used to think that losing my family was the end of my story," he told Marieke one evening as they were closing up the clinic. "But now I think maybe it was just the end of one chapter. This work, helping people the way you helped me, it feels like what I'm supposed to be doing." 3 years after the clinic opened, Marieke received an unexpected call. It was from the director of Amsterdam Medical Center, asking if she would be willing to consult with them on developing new policies for patient advocacy and healthcare worker flexibility. "We've been watching what you've accomplished," the director said. "We think there are lessons we can learn from your approach." Marieke agreed to the consultation, but she made it clear that her primary commitment would always be to the clinic and the people who needed the kind of care that only came from seeing patients as whole human beings. As she walked home that evening through the Amsterdam streets she knew so well, Marieke reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had lost a job but found a calling. She had risked everything for a stranger, and in return had discovered what was truly possible when compassion was allowed to guide decision-making. James had been right about one thing. Sometimes the people who seem to have nothing are the ones who end up changing your life forever. But Marika now understood that the opposite was also true. Sometimes the people we choose to help, even when it costs us everything, end up giving us more than we ever imagined possible. The foundation and clinic continued to grow, touching lives throughout Amsterdam and inspiring similar projects in other cities. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Marika had always believed. Everyone deserves to have someone care about what happens to them. That belief had cost her a job, but it had given her something much more valuable, a purpose that would last the rest of her life.